All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to jump right in. We're recording, so for any stragglers, you'll be able to catch up, no problem. Before we dive into Sprout Social's presentation today, we just have a couple of housekeeping items to run through. So as a quick note, these sessions are recorded. You will be provided the links to all of the recordings for all attendees within the next week or so. All session attendees should be on mute and off camera to enjoy the presentation and really soak it all in. The video streaming window still offers the Zoom chat functionality, but we'd really like to direct you all to the Whova chat and QA system instead. We will be monitoring all chats and questions there throughout the presentation. Please post there throughout the presentation, but we will wait until the end to review any questions, and we'll try to get through all of them if able. If you need any help throughout the conference or this session, don't hesitate to reach out either by emailing us at marketing@carnegiehighered.com, or you can message our team in the Whova app through the Ask Organizers Anything section of the community board. My name is Kelsey Anderson. I'm the AVP of Client Success here at Carnegie. We're so excited to kick off the connection once again this year for the third year in a row, and we're very excited to have Sprout Social here with us today, Ross Sims, David Elder, and Hattie Wilkinson, and I'll pass it on over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Kelsey, thank you, and thank you to the Carnegie team. We appreciate you having us. We are here to talk to everybody today about the power of data and storytelling and how to thoughtfully leverage social data to drive impact across campus and with your leadership teams. As we're getting started, if anybody wants to put in the chat where you're from and maybe the metric on social that you track the most or care the most about, would love to hear from everybody. But I did want to introduce ourselves. My name is Ross Sims. I'm one of our senior directors at Sprout Social, responsible for our enterprise and higher education segments. Pronouns are he, him. Thank you all so much for having me. I've had the pleasure to work with a number of academic institutions over the last couple of years to help centralize social efforts. And looking forward to the chat today. I am going to pass it over to Hattie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hattie Wilkinson. For over 8 years, I've explored many facets of social media across a whole bunch of different industries, but most recently have found my calling as a senior solutions engineer here at Sprout Social. So my role really involves working closely with our higher ed social team customers, mostly to help refine social workflows and mostly to demonstrate the ROI of all the hard work that they're putting in on social using Sprout tools. So I am a major geek for all things social data, so I'm really excited to dive into all of that with y'all today. And I'll kick it over to Dave.
Thanks, Hattie. Hi, everyone. So my name is Dave Elder, and along with Hattie and Ross, a member of our higher ed team, been working with higher ed customers for several years now. And really what my typical role is showing different ways that university comms and marketing teams can use social data in other parts of their work rather than just showing likes, clicks, and comments. But thank you, and certainly appreciate the opportunity to present here.
Thanks, Dave. So for everyone, we are certainly not here today to talk specifically about Sprout, but for those that don't know Sprout, we're a social media management company focused exclusively on bringing in all of your social channels, departments across campus, data, and inbound messages into one place and sharing your data and successes across campus. For those out there that are using Sprout, thank you so very much. But in addition to centralizing your channels, we help a lot of academic institutions to aggregate, analyze, and share their social data to other places like BI environments, reports to leadership, as well as service platforms like a Service Cloud, Zendesk, et cetera, so that you can more effectively manage the ever-changing networks efficiently. But today, we are going to talk about the ever-changing industry landscape, specifically how social is changing the way institutions think about the impact that social media can have on your university and your student and alumni experience. We'll talk through some of the things that we see at Sprout and working with many of you on all things social. And we'll go through a playbook on measuring impact, talk a little bit about network best practices. Here at Sprout, we've actually done some analysis in working with a number of higher ed customers over the last couple of years, and we've looked at all of the potential roles and responsibilities of someone that touches social media and digital marketing. In short, this list is well beyond 40 hours a week of stuff that could be done. In green, you'll see responsibilities related to planning and reporting. In white, you'll see all of the work that goes into developing and posting copy. In pink, you'll see all of the research and monitoring, triaging that you might need to do, inbound requests, staffing and supported related events like graduation, athletics, game day, and enrollment season. And then in yellow, you'll see all the research that needs to happen. This is things like sentiment tracking, crisis management, finding user-generated content, and staying on top of relevant trends. But knowing that there's well over 40 hours a week of responsibilities, we think about how we can make your lives easier through automation, giving you thought leadership on ways to engage your audience and humanize your brand and institution. But today we're gonna zoom out. We're gonna talk about reporting and eliminating really any misconceptions that social is a crisis or negative sentiment channel. It is where your students, alumni, donors, and more are at. We'll talk about all the power sitting within so much of the data that you all already have and are collecting, the brand awareness that continues to grow on social, and really thoughtful ways to measure impact and share that data effectively with leaders and stakeholders. For those following along, a question in the chat, if you're willing to drop your answer. Which of these do you feel like you're spending perhaps the most time on each week? But with that, I am going to transfer over to Dave.
Thanks, Ross. So for why social matters, I'm sure these numbers won't surprise anyone on this call. Social is increasingly becoming the first place that students begin the college search. Not only that, you have to be quick on the response, and you have to be thinking about how it will or could impact other common goal areas for universities, such as enrollment. Ross, if you hit the next slide. In our research, we see team bandwidth consistently being a roadblock in social team challenges. I'd love to see in the chat if you all feel the same way, but from my perspective, what this shows to me is that the data from the networks shows the volume of posted content, spam, video length have all increased significantly, and team size just has not kept up. We often hear that one of the most challenging parts of the job entirely, of a very difficult job in any respect, is showing the true ROI and value of what is for many marketers or CMO, VP types, a brand new communications channel. Especially with the intangibility of likes and comments, it can make it much more of a challenge to explain that unique nature of social. And what the numbers can do is show and back up that value. Now, the private sector knows this. The 85% number here highlights social as ubiquitously understood as a growth area for any organization. Now, reporting on social and understanding what the impact of this data can have on those other areas of your marketing efforts is shown to have an impact on marketers' career prospects. So for any industry and business like marketing, it's my belief that there's no industry more centered around metrics, and there's no area of marketing that lives and dies by metrics more than social media. And from our perspective, the most common challenges that we hear consistently center around a lack of common voice, differing priorities and or use cases for social, and really a poor perception, but not just of necessarily social itself, but especially of the level of effort required to maintain and generate a high quality social presence. Making sense of the data can be challenging for yourself, and then explaining it to someone else even more so. To speak more about some of the more positive ways that we see teams utilizing, back over to Ross.
Thanks, Dave. David talked a little bit about some of the perceptions of social as a crisis channel and some of the overall negative perceptions, but there is so much good that can and should be shared across campus with your deans, your stakeholders, and your leaders. Awesome examples of social teams activating their student body during the admissions and decision-making process. Here I'm showing Indiana University. They've done a wonderful job of activating their incoming student body. Many of your students and incoming students will have really large audiences on social, and there's easy ways to incentivize them. I'm sharing here an example of the admit packet that Indiana University has leveraged in the past. I love the use of the hashtag unlocking promoters during one of the most exciting days of an incoming student's life. And by including that hashtag in the admit packet, the IU team has been able to really tangibly track the impact through reach, through engagement and awareness. And now you as a social team have an easy way of sharing and unlocking an advocate. It doesn't stop there. I'll go a level deeper on unlocking your student body. Social media takeovers have become incredibly popular and successful. What we see, the more personal, the better. And think about ways to drive engagement versus just informing and consuming. We've seen different organizations leverage things like Instagram quizzes, open-ended questions, asks me anythings. And as you do this, know that Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn are great places to invest in ad format to promote. I'll call out a couple schools that we've seen do just a really wonderful job of outlining takeover guides and policies and best practices, and that is Boston University and CU Denver. So if you struggle to get leadership buy-in on this approach, I definitely recommend taking a look at some of their takeover guidelines. But in this example, you've got a really easy way to analyze and track performance. You can share back to stakeholders and deans and other departments on what type of content is resonating and really share personal stories of students and community where a really positive impact is happening. And then finally, probably my favorite topic, this could be its own session, but we've got examples of teams making a really positive impact on the monitoring side. While interacting with students that have just made a decision to attend your university, that is wonderful, but we also recognize the space is very competitive related to admissions as well. And at Sprout, we see that the concept of what we call a surprise and delight is just highly correlated with a prospective student choosing to attend one school or another. I'll give you an example. I'm from Chicago. I am a University of Illinois alumni. Many high school students in my area kind of analyzed University of Illinois, Illinois State, and Indiana University. And if that student has three choices, it's often that personal interaction that is proactive in nature on social media that can help a student pick one school over another. I am sharing a couple of examples and screenshots from Sprout, looking at kind of broader conversation around admissions and enrollment, and found a couple of great examples. But you've done all this great work. You need to find ways to ensure that you're sharing and communicating effectively internally to help secure resources, to share all of the great that's happening and how you're helping to move the needle. So I'm going to turn it over to Hattie to talk a little bit more about some of the metrics that matter and sharing.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. So we obviously know that the power of social data is undeniable, and most marketers and social managers are checking the data on a daily basis, mostly just to stay agile in a world where we know trends can last 2 weeks or 2 minutes. But with so much data out there at your fingertips, it can be really challenging to identify the right metrics that align to your school's goals. So we're going to walk through a bit of a blueprint on how you can drill down into those insights that matter most to you, your team, and your leaders so you can tell a really great story when it comes to that data. So for the blueprint, we're going to start with how we are measuring the metrics that matter most. We'll first start with the goals. What are we actually trying to accomplish here? Second step is the content. So this is what we're actually posting out on social. And this is where we need to decide what sort of content mix is going to help us achieve those goals. And then to the metrics on how do we show that this content is actually helping us achieve the goals that we've laid out. This is where your social team really shines. It's up to you to determine which metrics matter most for that goal and which metrics are going to help tell the best data story. So starting out with those goals, we're going to look at the primary goals of social teams and marketing teams. So Sprout had done some research a year or so back to understand the primary goals that social teams are measuring. So curious if any of these are resonating with you or the goals that you're usually working with on social. But what we can do here is look at each of these different goals on the chart. Then take it one step further to understand the different ways that we might execute a campaign or a piece of content for each of those goals. And then with that in mind, what can we measure for each of those different pieces of content? This is the blueprint that will really help us understand the story behind every possible campaign out there. So we're going to try something. I'll ask you to take out your phone or open up a browser and navigate to one of the social profiles that either you manage or your school manages, and take a look at the last 3 posts from that specific channel. And we're going to bring up these goals again, but what we want to dig into here is understanding how many of those 3 posts are going to be aligned to those goals that we just walked through. So I'll give you a second to pull that up, but would really encourage you to start thinking through is if you are actually posting with a purpose. There's so much content out there, so much great content coming from students and faculty and the campus, that there's so much content that actually can go out there. But we want to know if that content is actually being targeted towards your specific goals, and then understanding if you're measuring the metrics that really matter to show how you're going to be hitting those goals. We can look at an example of this, how we can align our goals to our posts and then track the right metrics. So this is an example of a post from my alma mater, from the University of Richmond, with a beautiful photo of campus and asking folks if they're excited about fall starting with all the beautiful trees around. So maybe ask you to drop in the chat. We'll give you a second here to think back to those goals that we were talking through, or just your knowledge of the sort of typical marketing funnel. What goal do we think this post is trying to achieve? Just looking at this overall post, what's the primary goal, do we think, of this post? If you thought brand awareness or something like engagement, you're definitely right here. This is a great example of a top of the funnel post that's trying to drive that brand awareness. In this case, we choose to measure things like impressions, views, or followers, comments, and engagement. And I think based off of the goal that we've laid out and what we're seeing, we've definitely achieved that goal. But to flip this a little bit, what if our goal for this post was to increase signups for campus visits or tours? I don't think we would be achieving that as much as we were trying to achieve brand awareness or engagement. While this photo is obviously a beautiful photo of campus that could potentially intrigue some prospective students to dig a little deeper, we would need to add things like a trackable link in bio or URL tracking and a really strong CTA in order to help us achieve that goal. And then for tracking metrics, we'd want to track things like clicks or conversions to actually display that we're achieving the goal that we set out. So that's a quick example. I'm now going to kick it over to Dave to think of another way that we can walk through this.
Thanks, Hattie. So this slide is a picture of a framework that anyone can follow when you have an idea for a campaign, a new way to use social, or something that you see another university post that you want to replicate. By framing your goal, by asking yourself some starting questions, it's a great place to start, but also helps you understand why certain social teams or why a certain social post is going to do what it does from the data standpoint. Now, for speaking to metrics by funnel stage, there are several examples given here. The goal of any campaign should have metrics to back it up. So a couple different ideas could be to focus those different goals of using social, put pen to paper, and start thinking of what metrics each kind of use case for social that your team has is going to be tracking from a performance standpoint. An example of a campaign with a goal of engagement. So this is what it could look like from maybe a content mix standpoint. So lots of short form video across the platforms where those perform well, like an Instagram Reel or a YouTube Short, is going to drive a lot more engagement rather than publishing, in this example, a bunch of links to a website with text. So that may sound simple enough, but having data to back that decision up shows that you've done your work. Now, when we're thinking about the tools themselves, there's many ways to find each data point to focus on in each tool. And even with some basic rudimentary analysis in Excel, you can inform yourself, start making some decisions about how you can or should respond to what's happening on social. And as I like to say, if you can track something, you can measure it. If you measure it, you can improve it. So growth will always make your team hard to ignore, and keep ears open no matter what story you're trying to tell. Now, for hand it back off to Hattie, you've put together this amazing campaign. You've aligned it to the right stage of the marketing funnel, and your social media posts are set up to drive the perfect metrics to help you say this was a success. Now what? And that's where Hattie will come in.
So the last part of our blueprint, like I mentioned previously, is to tell a story with this data. So this is where you can really level up the conversation by telling a great story. So right now, based off of that campaign and the content that we just put together, you're the gatekeeper of those insights that we discussed. Keeping that all to yourself isn't going to help that 85% stat that we mentioned from the beginning. So I challenge you to really make it a point to share your findings. Talk about what worked and what didn't. Don't be afraid of what didn't work. Also talk about what kind of support you might need next time. Social media teams tend to be undervalued despite the incredible wealth of frontline information that you all have. But each group that you're sharing these metrics with might be interested in some different data and also some different data stories. When you're talking to your team, that's where you can really get into the nitty-gritty of the numbers and the strategy, what worked, what didn't, and where you can improve next time. But when you're sharing outcomes with leaders, pair those insights with recommendations and use your opinion as the expert in the space. Focus on telling a great data story here around outcomes, the brand promise, and some vision. A good way to find storylines for any of this data that you're sharing out with leadership is to prove or disprove a hypothesis. In other words, come to the data with a question instead of just looking at a whole bunch of numbers and trying to find some meaning or figure out a story based off of just those specific numbers. So, how do we ensure that our story is really coming through when we start sharing these insights out? Context is really everything here. Pair your data with context. I would love to hear in the chat, because this is an experience that I have seen and been a part of many times. Has anyone ever shared metrics with leadership only to hear back, is this good? Or what does this mean? Or what do we need to do about this? I definitely have, as a social manager, of sharing out a laundry list of numbers or an Excel spreadsheet with engagements and impressions and engagement rate and all these different metrics. And so much work had gone into that, only just to hear, what does this all mean? You all, as the social experts, know this data inside and out. And sometimes, or maybe most of the time, your leaders don't know it as well as you do. So just putting those numbers out there without explaining what really went into all of that data is going to expose you to a lot of questions and some backpedaling, because data without context is really just a number that anybody could take any meaning from. So within Sprout, we help marketers pair their metrics with context to ensure that the data story that they're trying to tell is always being translated appropriately. Other ways you can tell a great data story, and I think I saw this in the chat, are in-person meetings to walk through social metrics to make sure that everyone is on the same page, or always sending email summaries with any of your metrics and your social reports. Always remember that something caused this data to happen, and data can lead, but only if you know where you're headed and if you can translate that appropriately. Now, I know I said context is everything, but consistency is also everything. Think back to your childhood, wondering what your favorite story was. I know I was a huge fan of Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss, so much so that I forced my parents to read it to me almost every night before bed. And now, 31 years later, I could probably recite it by heart. And I can recite it by heart at this point because consistency is really what makes stories memorable. Of course, the viral post is going to be memorable, but consistency is really important. And your social stories need to be consistent and memorable to your leaders. Like all of you know, social can really change in the blink of an eye, which also means your data story can change just as quickly. So, with your team at the helm and the ones responsible for translating these data stories, you need a really efficient way to fill in your leaders with that data and stay memorable with leadership. Some of these examples can look like using live links, automated PDF reports, or even just a huge red block on your calendar each week as a reminder to share those insights out with leadership to make sure you don't forget. You really need to make sure that it's a priority for your leadership to make social a priority. With so much conversation happening on social every single second, it's really risky for them not to be in the loop. You really need to be consistent in order to then be memorable. And I know reporting and analytics can feel like the end all be all of your campaigns or your social programs, and it can feel like a lot of pressure. But remember that nothing is final, and that's really what makes our jobs as social marketers really exciting. Using data to tell our stories can give us the flexibility to change and grow with our findings and always be really flexible. I would challenge you to be ready to change your content calendar, try new things, and be on top of those best practices in your area, no matter how scary that can sometimes feel. I know, especially in higher ed, from talking to so many different social teams, it can feel overwhelming knowing that you are marketing to so many different audiences and telling so many different stories. But I think the great news with that is that so many other universities are facing the exact same thing you are and trying to tell similar stories across the board. So I challenge you to spend some quality time either each week or each month learning about how other schools are tackling some of those same challenges that you're facing and telling some of those same stories, and get really excited to pivot when you find fresh new stories to tell.
Hattie, thank you for going through that. Summing that all up, when you get back to regularly scheduled programming later this week, there's a couple of things that we'd love for everybody to take away and to focus on. Be really clear and get clear on your social goals, your content mix, and your metrics to track. And really commit to a plan to share insights with your extended team and leadership on a consistent basis. We see the structure of reporting and storytelling working in a really consistent way around a data or a set of data, the story that you want to tell, along with that context and tactical recommendations that Hattie talked about. Really commit to that plan. And this can be the way to bring visibility to all of the great work you all are doing and help you gain resources, commitment for growing social, and buy-in from your leadership teams. And then finally, be ready to pivot. We know the networks evolve very quickly. There's often one in the news on a weekly basis. But with that all said, we appreciate you all spending time with us here. And we do want to leave 10, 15 minutes for question and answer.
We hear that the Whova app might not be working for questions, so feel free to post in the Q&A here in Zoom if you'd like. We did get one early on if you'd like to address that. The question was, we post a lot of thought leadership, research-based articles. I want to know how effective native posts are at driving people to our website and reading our articles. Any recommendations that you would have for pulling data for this individual? I can post that here too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that came from Boston University, and I think where we're talking about sort of what metrics we're tracking. So, and that can be especially helpful to share out with leadership as well, especially if leadership is interested in what it is that they're posting or they're being posted about, if they're engaged in that way. So would definitely suggest URL tracking to understand how you're driving folks to the website. And then all of those really great click metrics are going to be helpful. I know within Sprout, we use a system of tagging and labeling content to understand sort of the different segments of content. So by splitting different segments apart, that can be really helpful of just ensuring that you know sort of which segment of content is about one leader or one segment of research. So then you can look at that a little bit easier instead of looking at the whole big scope of everything that you've posted around the last month or the last semester. So that segmentation can be super helpful.
Thanks, Hattie. Another question that came in on a few of your slides, you referred to a report published by Sprout. Is that publicly available? And could we have access to that link?
Yeah, great question. There is a study that we do every year called the Sprout Social Index. If you give me a moment, I will make sure to drop that in the chat for everybody. But some of the stuff that we shared, great insights. It actually does go a little bit deeper depending on industry as well. And we, of course, would be happy to go much deeper on that with anybody that's interested.
I just dropped that in the chat. Yep.
All right, another question. A couple of questions came through. Thank you all. Keep them coming. SWAC from SVSU, recommendations for helping the various academic departments and administrative offices that maintain their own social channels care about metrics. Many seemingly maintain accounts as a check mark, but they don't have much strategy or care about growing their channels. Any recommendations for supporting and or working with departments across campus?
Yeah, Kelsey, I'll take a quick stab at this one, and I would love Hattie and Dave's thoughts as well. But for who asked this question, you are certainly not alone. We have seen quite a bit of that, and a lot of universities that are starting to think about maybe a more holistic plan to centralize a lot of that. I think there are benefits to centralizing so many of those channels into one place for two reasons. I think, we've talked about data and storytelling today, and it is so much easier to understand what is and isn't working when you have oversight over channels in one centralized place. But then from a governance standpoint as well, we've seen a lot of examples where whether it is student interns or other people in the past have stood up channels that maybe are not in use. We'd be happy to go deeper on this, but I would recommend, every year, a couple years, perhaps doing an audit and understanding what channels are out there, which ones actually need to be out there, what purpose do they serve? Even thinking about something like admissions, we've seen some schools have a dedicated social channel just for admissions, while others prefer to run it at the department level. There are pros and cons to that approach that we'd be happy to go into. But I think from a reporting standpoint, the more that you can have oversight over that to understand what best practices look like and what level of governance is out there has been really helpful. Hattie and Dave, let me know if you had anything you'd add.
I think from a day-to-day perspective, what we hear from some of those smaller offices or the individual departments is that those folks tend to wear a lot of different hats. So they're involved in a lot of different things. So even just setting aside some time on maybe a monthly or even one each semester, having sometimes we hear like a social media committee type meeting can be really beneficial just to ensure that they are up to date on sort of what the best practices are for each of the individual networks and ensuring that they don't feel like they're totally on their own running their own channel, that you are there to support them. I think that can go a long way with not a ton of lift from your team.
Yeah, and nothing else to add from what Ross and Hattie mentioned. Definitely echo that. I think what from my experience, what I've seen is that it has to come from the leadership side. So if and when there are going to be, like Hattie mentioned, kind of those other one-off departments, if there's not as much utility for them and they're not going to care as much about an individual metric, that it would have to come from the leadership side many times, where that leader is looking for that kind of all up view into what's happening on campus. So a lot of times it may take something like that for kind of the onus to be taken by those individual teams.
Yeah, great responses. I just want to jump ahead to Amy's question that just came through because I think it relates really well to what we just talked about. But what are the best ways to get leaders on board with centralizing social media strategies?
Kelsey, this is a great question. I'll give a couple thoughts and then open it up. But I think in today's environment, there's probably two different areas that we see a lot. And I think as uncomfortable as it can be, talking through the risk of not centralizing. So we talked just a moment ago about the question of perhaps some of the channels that are out there that are kind of a check mark or check the box, or maybe have been out there for a long time and aren't being used. That there is certainly some risk there in a world where we continue to monitor social and engagement, and the networks change all the time. Governance has been really paramount for a lot of leaders that are coming up with more of a sophisticated plan. And then I think being able to point to specific examples kind of on the reporting and successes side as well. So if you've got specific departments that do a really great job of driving revenue, of decreasing risk, of bringing students and incoming students into the funnel, I would wonder, are there departments that by not centralizing or not having that focus are actually missing out on an opportunity so that you can more consistently standardize what the best of looks like across campus? Hattie and Dave would love your perspective as well.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. So I think too, for my alma mater side being Indiana University, I love Ross's example. There were a few things I believe I got sent when had initially indicated I was going to Indiana University. I can't put a tangible dollar amount on that. I can't put a tangible, saying how many times I'm going back to Indiana now as adults because of the way that I felt welcome to campus. But sometimes, yes, it can be like a vibe, so to speak, or just what you want your brand to be in the market as far as the story that you're trying to tell. But I would say from a suggestion standpoint, a lot of what we talk about is in this presentation today was getting your team that bigger seat at the table to show that this is sort of the growing, the go forward communications channel for many, if not all, universities. So kind of from two facets, hitting it from the data side of the argument, and then of course also just from more holistically, what do we want to be? Do we want to be reaching people on this communication channel and showing them that we feel that even the College of Engineering account with 3,000 followers on a couple different platforms is just as important as the flagship accounts that are getting hundreds of thousands of DMs a day?
I am going to skip to this next one too, because I feel like it's all under the same umbrella of getting various departments on board and kind of rowing in the same direction. But do you have any recommendations on kind of best process to create social media policies, best practices, and rules for coaches and or athletic team accounts to follow?
Kelsey, it's a great question. I think from our perspective, we've certainly seen a lot of examples of what good looks like across different universities. I'd be happy to do a little bit of research and share some of what we see as being really thoughtful policies. I'm curious if our team has any additional insight, but I think the spirit of that being collaborative and really thinking through potential risks, what the goals are of social, and how we can get more aligned on outcomes will be really critical to that.
Yeah, and I think, Ross, one thing to add there is that I have seen some of these policies be sort of on polar opposite ends of either not existing and letting everybody sort of um, do what they want on social, or some really strict policies that don't actually let the brand voice shine through. So I think finding that middle ground is really important there on creating policies that ensure that you are staying on sort of brand voice or escalating things when necessary, but then still allowing that brand voice to shine through, especially when it comes to athletic departments. I think we have seen even just this year, some great athletic team and athletic department social performance when it comes to that true brand voice and a unique brand voice that might be different than the central comms team across the university. So I think that middle ground, it can be hard to reach, but I think that's what you're aiming for.
Absolutely. Thank you. Just a couple of more here. We are a small office of 2 people who do traditional, social, digital, paid media, as well as projects for recruitment. How much time should we plan on allotting to planning in order to do a good job posting on social?
Yeah, I think if you there's not going to be a right answer here, which is unfortunate that I don't think anybody could give you a time frame that you should be spending, and would also be curious from everybody who is here sharing some best practices with planning and posting, since all of your universities will be slightly different. But I think if you can do that good job planning, the actual posting of social shouldn't be taking up too much of your time. So if you have content that is ready to go, sort of like we talked about previously, it's planned to align to a goal. You sort of know what metrics you're going to be tracking, and then each of those metrics are aligned to sort of an aspect of that post, like we talked about some CTAs or a link in bio previously. As long as that planning has been done up front, the posting, the actual physical posting of the content shouldn't be taking up too much of your time, and can either be done in advance if you can schedule in advance, or you'll have a good plan in place for yourself to just get that content out when it's ready to go.
Absolutely. Thanks, Hattie. One final question that we have here. Have you seen any notable differences in top engagement strategies for universities that operate primarily via an online platform versus in-person campus centered?
Yeah, on this question, I'm a little curious for the opposite side, what that versus in-person campus centered. I think we typically see a healthy mix of sort of the like takeover style, what Ross mentioned, for more like centering on like even like a in-person campus tour. One way potentially to think about this is if your university typically enrolls from in-state versus out of state for a public university, if there's just more of a lift to get those prospective students on campus, then maybe you would want to focus more on that online presence and focus more on that engagement strategy. But I think what we typically see from just the overall holistic perspective of what an engagement strategy looks like for those top universities, they do look very different, in fact. And I think you can see that there are certain universities that will prioritize even something like a Twitter X presence or continue to prioritize a Facebook presence, where we also talk to some universities that are not focusing on those networks as much anymore. So again, kind of falling back to, it is that data story. It is going to take a more kind of looking under the covers of your networks and your current goals and priorities in using social, and then mapping that to the populations that you're serving, right? Students, alumni, faculty, and so on.
Well, any final questions from attendees? Otherwise, we worked through them.
Well, Kelsey, thank you for helping to moderate. For those that have joined, just a huge thank you for spending a little time with us. If you do want to go deeper on any of the metrics or data or research that we've collected, or would of course like to talk about Sprout, I have dropped in a QR code that will direct back an email towards us. But just a huge thank you for attending, and Kelsey and team, a huge thank you to the Carnegie team for having us. We are very grateful.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. Thank you so much for making time for this. Once again, happy to have the connection running through Carnegie for another year. Be sure to head back, attendees, to the agenda in the Whova app so you can take a look at the remaining sessions and add them to your calendar. The next session today is at noon, 12 p.m. Eastern, and is with Google, Implications for Digital Marketing in a Cookieless World. So thanks again and enjoy the rest of the conference.